Ethan's calloused hands tightened around the wrench as he bent over the corroded engine of the '69 Mustang. Sweat rolled down his weathered face, tracing the deep lines carved by time and struggle. The setting sun stretched long shadows across the cluttered garage, reflecting off scattered tools and spare parts. With a grunt, he strained against a stubborn bolt, muscles protesting the effort. At 56, his body didn't bounce back the way it used to. But Ethan welcomed the familiar burn. Physical labor was a distraction, a way to drown out memories he'd rather leave buried. With a sharp crack, the bolt finally gave way. Ethan allowed himself a small, satisfied smirk as he straightened, his spine popping in protest. Wiping his greasy hands on an already stained work shirt, he reached for the half-empty beer sitting on his workbench. Outside, as twilight deepened into night, the rhythmic chorus of crickets filled the air. He took a slow sip, letting the bitter taste settle, his gaze drifting to the garage's small window. The silhouettes of towering pine trees swayed against the darkening sky. Then, he froze. A streak of light tore across the heavens, blazing bright before vanishing beyond the treetops with a distant, muffled crash. The impact sent a tremor through the ground, dust trickling from the rafters. Ethan set down the bottle, his instincts kicking in. Years spent in dangerous places had honed a deep, unshakable alertness. He grabbed the flashlight from the workbench and moved toward the door with purpose. Whatever had fallen in his woods, he intended to find out. The cool night air was a stark contrast to the garage's stifling heat. He paused for a moment, letting his eyes adjust before pressing forward. A faint glow pulsed through the dense forest, accompanied by tendrils of smoke curling into the sky. Jaw clenched, Ethan moved swiftly, branches tugging at his clothes as he pushed through the underbrush. The acrid scent of scorched earth thickened with every step. As he neared the impact site, the eerie glow intensified, casting twisted shadows through the trees. He crouched low, peering through the foliage, and what he saw made his breath hitch. A sleek, metallic craft lay half buried in the soil, steam hissing from ruptured panels. It was unlike any aircraft he had ever seen. No wings, no propellers, no visible means of propulsion. The hull shimmered, shifting and flowing like liquid mercury under the dim light. "Jesus," Ethan whispered, struggling to process the impossible sight before him. A faint groan snapped him from his daze. His sharp gaze darted toward a figure sprawled near the wreckage. He squinted, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. It was a woman, tall, lean, and unmistakably athletic, but her skin... Ethan blinked, certain his eyes were deceiving him. Her skin gleamed with an iridescent blue hue, intricate silver patterns rippling across it like frost on glass. Another groan, weaker this time. Dark liquid seeped from a deep gash across her torso. She was hurt. Badly. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to pretend he hadn't seen anything. But Ethan had witnessed enough death in his lifetime. He wasn't about to stand by and watch another life slip away. His decision made, he stepped from the shadows, hands raised in what he hoped was a universal sign of peace. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice steady. "I'm not here to hurt you." The woman's eyes snapped open at the sound of his voice. They were an intense violet, glowing faintly, filled with a mixture of pain, fear, and wary resignation. She spoke, her voice a lilting melody despite its weakness. Ethan couldn't understand the words, but the desperation in her tone needed no translation. He knelt beside her, wincing at the severity of her wound. "You're hurt," he said, knowing she wouldn't understand but needing to fill the silence. "I need to get you somewhere safe." She flinched as he reached toward her, but she didn't resist. Steeling himself, Ethan slid his arms beneath her and lifted her in one swift motion. She let out a sharp cry, her body going rigid with pain. "Hold on!" he gritted out, adjusting his grip. "Just hold on!" The trek back to the cabin was grueling. By the time he reached the porch, his arms burned, his shirt soaked with sweat, and her strange, dark blood. He shouldered open the door, navigating through the dim interior to the bedroom. With utmost care, he lowered her onto the bed. She had lost consciousness somewhere along the way, her breathing shallow, her luminous skin dimming. Ethan moved quickly, retrieving what little medical supplies he had. This was far beyond his expertise, but he had to try. As he worked, cleaning the wound, applying pressure, securing a bandage, he found himself studying her features. Despite the strange coloring, she looked human. High cheekbones, full lips, a delicate nose. Beautiful in an otherworldly way. She stirred as he finished, her eyes fluttering open. They locked onto his, filled with confusion and something else. Uncertainty. She whispered something, the words foreign yet oddly familiar. Ethan leaned closer. "I don't understand," he admitted softly. "But you're safe here. I'm trying to help." She hesitated, then raised a trembling hand to his face. Her fingertips barely brushed his skin, and a strange sensation, like static electricity, rippled through him. Her next words came clearer, though halting. "Why, not kill?" Ethan reeled, stunned. "Kill you?" he repeated. "Why would I do that?" Her violet eyes widened slightly. "Other races must die." A chill ran down his spine. What kind of place had she come from? "That's not how we do things here," he said firmly. "I don't know where you're from or who's after you, but I'm not going to hurt you." I promise. A single tear slipped down her cheek, shimmering in the dim light. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan swallowed the lump in his throat. "What's your name?" Her lips parted. "Naira." He let the name settle on his tongue. "Naira. I'm Ethan." She nodded weakly. "Ethan." Her eyes drifted shut, exhaustion overtaking her. But even as she slipped into unconsciousness, her fingers remained curled around his. Ethan sat beside her long into the night, watching the slow, steady rise and fall of her chest, wondering what in the hell he had just gotten himself into. "No, they wouldn't. You're different." Sienna stepped closer, her hand pressing lightly against Noah's chest. "Your heart beats so strongly. Is this normal for humans?" Noah's breath hitched. Her touch sent a shiver racing through him, an electric current that made his pulse hammer even harder. She was too close. Close enough for him to catch the faint, unfamiliar floral scent that clung to her hair. "I, he stammered, his brain scrambling for coherence. "Yeah, I guess so. Why?" Sienna's golden eyes gleamed with curiosity. "I find it fascinating," she admitted. Her fingers trailed slowly up to his shoulder, leaving a strange, tingling warmth in their wake. "Your species. You're so different from mine." Noah swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. "Different how?" Sienna tilted her head, considering. "We do not touch as freely as you do. Physical contact is reserved for specific rituals or—" She hesitated, her emerald-hued skin darkening slightly. "Or—" Noah pressed, his voice rougher than intended. Sienna's gaze locked onto his, something unreadable flickering in their depths. "Or for mates," she murmured. The air between them seemed to crackle. Noah's heart pounded so violently it almost hurt. His mind screamed at him to step back, to put distance between them, but his body refused to listen. "Sienna," he began, his voice strained with both caution and something deeper, something dangerously close to longing. "I don't think—" She silenced him with a single finger against his lips. "You think too much," she whispered. "I've watched you, Noah. The way you move. The strength in your hands. I've never felt drawn to another being like this." Noah's restraint snapped. With a low growl, he pulled her against him, crushing his mouth to hers in a desperate, searing kiss. Sienna melted into him, a soft sound escaping her throat, her fingers tangling in his hair as the months of isolation and unspoken desire crashed over them. When they finally parted, both were breathing hard. Noah pressed his forehead against hers, struggling to steady himself. "We shouldn't," he said hoarsely, even as his body screamed otherwise. "You're still healing, and I'm old enough to be—" Sienna laughed, the sound like wind chimes in the summer air. "Noah," she said, her tone suddenly serious. You have to promise me something. He exhaled slowly. What? No more secrets, she said firmly. You need to know everything. Why I'm running, who's after me. All of it. If I stay here, if you're going to protect me, you deserve the truth. Noah studied her, searching her face for any sign of hesitation. But all he saw was quiet determination. He nodded. All right, start talking. Sienna took a deep breath. It's a long story, she warned, and you might not like what you hear. I can handle it, Noah assured her, guiding her toward the worn-out couch. As she spoke, weaving a tale of intergalactic war, betrayal, and a conspiracy that threatened entire civilizations, Noah felt something shift inside him. He should have been terrified. Instead, for the first time in years, he felt alive. By the time Sienna finished, her voice barely above a whisper, unshed tears shimmered in her eyes. I had no choice but to flee, she said. The evidence I carry could destroy everything they've built. But if they catch me... They won't, Noah interrupted, his jaw tight. Sienna blinked as he reached for her hand. The contrast of her iridescent skin against his rough, scarred palm sent a jolt through him. I won't let that happen, he vowed. A small, grateful smile touched her lips. But before she could speak, a deafening explosion shattered the moment. The windows rattled violently. Noah shot to his feet, instincts from his past life snapping into place. They found me, Sienna whispered, fear carving deep lines into her delicate features. Noah didn't hesitate. Back door. Now. He grabbed a worn-out duffel from beneath the floorboards, old habits never died, and shoved Sienna forward. They burst into the night, just as the front door exploded inward. Noah led them into the thick forest, his hand never leaving the small of her back as they ran. The sound of pursuit was too close. My ship, she panted, dodging a low-hanging branch. Gone, Noah said shortly. We have to make it to my truck. It's hidden about a mile east. A searing bolt of energy struck a tree beside them, sending burning bark flying in every direction. Sienna yelped, stumbling. Noah caught her arm, yanking her upright. Keep moving, he barked, adrenaline scorching through his veins. It had been years since he'd been in combat, but his body remembered. He zigzagged through the trees, making them harder targets. They crashed through the underbrush, lungs burning. After what felt like an eternity, they broke through the tree line. Noah's battered old pickup sat waiting, concealed beneath a camouflaged tarp. He ripped it away, fumbling for the keys. Get in, he yelled. Sienna vaulted into the passenger seat just as another shot barely missed them. Noah gunned the engine. Tires spun in the dirt before catching, and the truck shot forward. In the rearview mirror, sleek, unfamiliar vehicles emerged from the shadows of the forest. His knuckles turned white on the steering wheel. We can't outrun them forever, Sienna said, her usually melodic voice tight with fear. Noah's jaw set. We don't have to. A plan was already forming. I know these roads better than anyone. We just need to buy some time. For the next few hours, Noah pushed the truck to its limits, weaving through a labyrinth of unmarked dirt roads and hidden trails. He used every trick he knew to throw off their pursuers. As dawn broke, the tension in his shoulders finally eased. No sign of pursuit. I think we lost them, he said. For now, Sienna murmured. She slumped against the seat, exhaustion evident in the slump of her shoulders. Noah glanced at her. You handled yourself well back there. You did too, she said, studying him. Where did you learn to evade like that? His grip tightened on the wheel. Let's just say, this isn't my first time being hunted. Sienna didn't press. Instead, she reached out, her fingers brushing his forearm. The warmth of her touch sent that same electric jolt through him. Thank you, Noah, she said softly. I know I've brought nothing but trouble into your life, but I'm grateful you're here. For a moment, the world seemed to fall away. Noah had the overwhelming urge to stop the truck, to pull her into his arms. Instead, he clenched his jaw and focused on the road ahead. "We're in this together now," he said gruffly. "No point looking back." They drove in silence until Noah turned onto a nearly invisible dirt path. The truck bounced along the uneven terrain. "Where are we going?" Sienna asked. "An old hunting cabin," Noah replied. "Hasn't been used in years. Should be safe. At least for a little while." As they pulled up to the isolated structure, nestled deep in the wilderness, Sienna exhaled. "It's perfect," she whispered. Noah only hoped she was right. Noah had gathered whatever supplies he could during their escape. "You need proper rest." For a moment, an awkward silence settled between them. Neither wanted to acknowledge the obvious solution. Finally, Noah cleared his throat. "Look," he said, his voice gruff with embarrassment. "It's a tight fit, but we could probably both squeeze in, if you're comfortable with that." Sienna's golden eyes widened slightly, but then she nodded. "Yes, that would be acceptable." Settling in was a slow, careful process of shifting positions and muttered apologies. Eventually, they found a way to fit, with Sienna's back pressed against Noah's chest. He was acutely aware of her warmth, the subtle floral scent of her hair. "Good night, Noah," Sienna whispered, her voice barely audible. "Night," he murmured back, ignoring the way his pulse thundered at their proximity. Sleep came eventually, but it was restless, filled with strange dreams. By the time Noah woke the next morning, Sienna was already up, studying a battered map she had found in the cabin. Over the next few days, they settled into a routine. Noah ventured out for supplies, always on high alert for signs of pursuit, while Sienna pored over star charts and ancient navigation records, searching for a way to get her vital information to the right people. Evenings were spent talking. Sienna spoke of distant galaxies and cultures unlike anything Noah had ever imagined. In return, he found himself opening up, about his past, his time in the military, the losses that had driven him into isolation. As the days passed, something shifted. Casual touches lingered longer than necessary. Glances held a charged intensity. One night, as they sat beside the fire, Sienna finally voiced the question that had been hanging between them. "Noah," she began hesitantly, "there's something I need to understand about human customs." He arched an eyebrow, sensing the weight behind her words. "What's on your mind?" Sienna bit her lip, a gesture he found endearingly human. "In my culture, physical intimacy is highly regulated, but I've noticed humans seem much more open with their affections." Her gaze met his, shimmering in the firelight. "I find myself curious." Noah's mouth went dry. "Curious about what, exactly?" Sienna stood, crossing the small space between them with fluid grace. Slowly she reached out, tracing her fingers along his jaw. "About this," she murmured. "About the way my skin tingles when you're near. About the warmth I feel when you look at me." Noah caught her hand, his rough fingers intertwining with hers. "Sienna," he said, his voice low, strained. "We need to be careful here. This situation, it's complicated." Her expression flickered. "Because I'm not human?" "No," he said immediately. "That's not it. It's just, I'm older than you, and you're in danger. I don't want to take advantage." Sienna pressed a finger to his lips, silencing him. "My people live for centuries, Noah. By our standards, you are barely more than a youth." A small, knowing smile touched her lips. "And as for the danger, isn't that all the more reason to take what happiness we can?" Noah searched her eyes. All he saw was sincerity, and a longing that mirrored his own. He exhaled shakily, lifting a hand to brush a strand of hair from her face. "All right," he murmured. "But we take it slow. This is new territory for both of us." Sienna's smile was radiant. She leaned in, pressing a feather-light kiss to the corner of his mouth. "I look forward to exploring it together." From that moment, their relationship deepened into something neither had expected, but both desperately needed. They found solace in each other's arms, a respite from the constant fear of discovery. But reality was never far away. One morning, as they shared a simple breakfast, Noah finally broached the subject they had both been avoiding. "We need a plan," he said. "We can't keep running forever. There has to be a way to get your information to someone who can use it." Sienna nodded grimly. "I've been thinking about that. There's a resistance movement working against the Dominion. If we can find them—" Noah leaned forward, his tactical mind already working. "How do we make contact?" Sienna began outlining the complex web of alliances, hidden safe houses, and encrypted transmissions. As he listened, adrenaline surged through him. This was what he had been trained for: strategy, survival, impossible odds. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive. And as he looked at Sienna, her eyes burning with determination, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He'd follow her to the ends of the universe, if that's what it took. The old truck rumbled down a deserted highway, its engine straining under the punishing pace Noah demanded. In the passenger seat, Sienna studied a battered tablet, inputting complex calculations. "How much farther?" Noah asked, his voice rough with exhaustion. They had been driving for days, snatching sleep in shifts, surviving on gas station coffee and stale sandwiches. "We're close," she said. "The Resistance's last known location should be just beyond the next city." Noah nodded, jaw set. It was a gamble. The Resistance might not even exist anymore. But this was their only chance. As they crested a hill, the distant glow of the city came into view. A sense of unease prickled down Noah's spine. After weeks in the wilderness, the idea of stepping into a populated area made his instincts scream. "We need to ditch the truck," he muttered. "Too easy to track." Sienna agreed. "There's an abandoned factory on the outskirts," she said, consulting her tablet. "It might work as a temporary base while we search." Noah maneuvered off the road, following her directions down a series of overgrown paths. The factory loomed before them, a dark silhouette against the night sky. As they climbed out, stretching stiff muscles, movement flickered in Noah's peripheral vision. He tensed. His hand instinctively moved to the weapon at his waist. "We're not alone," he murmured. Before Sienna could respond, a dozen figures emerged from the shadows, surrounding them. Noah forced himself to stay still, acutely aware of the weapons trained on them. A tall figure stepped forward, lowering his hood to reveal distinctly non-human features. Shimmering blue skin, glowing eyes. "Sienna of Alith," the alien said, his voice a low, melodic rumble. "We've been expecting you." Sienna inhaled sharply. "You're with the Resistance?" The alien nodded. "I am Valor, commander of the Liberation Front. We intercepted transmissions about your arrival." His gaze flickered to Noah. "And it seems the Dominion's reach extends even to this world." Noah remained tense, his years of training making trust a foreign concept. "How do we know you're not working for them?" he demanded. Valor's lips quirked in something almost resembling a smile. "A wise question, human." His gaze returned to Sienna. "You carry vital information, don't you? Data that could bring the Dominion to its knees." Sienna hesitated, then nodded. Before anyone could say more, the distant hum of approaching ships split the night air. "They found us," Noah muttered. Valor's expression darkened. "Inside. Now." Energy bolts rained down as they sprinted toward the factory. Inside, Resistance fighters worked quickly, activating defenses. A shimmering energy shield crackled to life just as the first blast struck. "It won't hold for long," Valor warned. "We need to get that data off-world immediately." Sienna squared her shoulders. "I'm ready." Noah grabbed her arm. "Wait. What exactly are you about to do?" She turned to him, fear and resolve warring in her eyes. "The data is stored in my neural pathways," she explained. "To transmit it, I have to interface directly." "Resolve the data, it's encoded in my neural pathways," she explained. "To transmit it, I'll need to interface directly with the Resistance's systems. It's not without risk." Jackson's stomach tightened. What kind of risk? He demanded. Alaric answered, his tone heavy. The process is intense. There's a chance of neural damage. Perhaps even… He trailed off, but the meaning was clear. No, Jackson said firmly. There has to be another way. Leora cupped his face in her hands, her touch sending familiar sparks through him, despite the gravity of the moment. Jackson, she said softly, this is bigger than us. If we don't stop the syndicate, countless worlds will suffer. I have to try. Jackson wanted to argue, to find another way, but the building shook with another impact, dust raining from the ceiling. They were out of time. Okay, he said, his voice rough with emotion. But I'm staying right here with you. Leora nodded, a small smile playing at her lips, despite the dire situation. She turned to Alaric. Let's do this. The next few minutes were a blur of frantic activity. Leora was hooked up to a dizzying array of equipment, electrodes placed on her temples and the base of her skull. Jackson stood by her side, holding her hand tightly as the machines hummed to life. Leora's body went rigid, her back arching as data began to flow. Jackson watched in horror as her eyes rolled back, alien symbols flickering across their surface. Outside, the battle raged. The resistance fighters held their ground, but it was clear they were outnumbered and outgunned. The energy shield flickered dangerously, threatening to fail at any moment. How much longer? Jackson shouted over the chaos. Alaric's fingers flew over the control panel. Almost there, he called back. Just a few more seconds. Suddenly, Leora's body went limp. The machines fell silent, and for a heart-stopping moment, Jackson feared the worst. Then, her eyes fluttered open, focusing on his face with effort. Did it work? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alaric let out a triumphant cry. We got it! The full data package transmitted to our secure servers off-world. The Syndicate's days are numbered. Relief flooded through Jackson, but it was short-lived. The energy shield collapsed with a deafening boom, and the factory walls began to crumble under heavy fire. We need to move now, Alaric shouted, already ushering his team toward a hidden exit. Jackson scooped Leora into his arms, her body worryingly light. Hold on, he murmured, following the retreating resistance fighters. They emerged into chaos, the night sky alive with crisscrossing energy beams and the scream of engines. Jackson's military training kicked in. His eyes automatically assessed threats and plotted the safest route. This way, he barked, taking the lead. The group followed, trusting his combat experience. They had almost reached the relative safety of a nearby tree line when a massive explosion rocked the ground. Jackson stumbled, nearly losing his grip on Leora. He turned to see a syndicate ship bearing down on them, weapons primed. Time seemed to slow. Jackson knew they couldn't outrun the ship. In that moment, he made a decision that went against every survival instinct he had. Keep going, he shouted to Alaric and the others. I'll hold them off. Before anyone could protest, Jackson gently set Leora down and charged back toward the ship. He heard her cry out his name, but he didn't look back. If this was how it ended, so be it. At least she would be safe. Jackson snatched up a fallen energy weapon, its alien design awkward in his hands. He took aim at the approaching ship, memories of countless battles flashing through his mind. Just as he was about to fire, a surge of energy crackled past him. Jackson turned in shock to see Leora standing beside him, her hands outstretched and glowing with an otherworldly light. I told you, she said, a fierce grin on her face despite her exhaustion. We're in this together. Before Jackson could respond, Leora unleashed a blast of pure energy that struck the syndicate ship dead center. The vessel shuddered, its systems overloading in a spectacular light show before it plummeted to the ground. In the stunned silence that followed, Jackson turned to Leora in amazement. How did you… She shrugged, swaying slightly on her feet. A little trick I picked up. Didn't know if it would work on something that big. Jackson laughed, the sound bordering on hysteria as the adrenaline began to ebb. He pulled Leora into his arms, not caring who saw. You are full of surprises, he murmured into her hair. The moment was interrupted by Alaric's urgent voice. We need to leave now. More ships are incoming. The next hours passed in a blur of frantic movement. The Resistance had a ship hidden nearby, large enough to accommodate their entire group. As they broke atmosphere, Jackson felt a mixture of relief and sadness. He was leaving behind the only home he'd ever known. But as he looked at Leora, he knew he was exactly where he needed to be. Days later, safely hidden at a resistance base on a distant moon, Jackson and Leora finally had a moment to breathe. They stood on a balcony overlooking an alien landscape, marveling at the strange beauty of twin suns setting over purple mountains. "So," Jackson said, breaking the comfortable silence, "what happens now?" Leora turned to him, her emerald eyes shimmering with emotion. "The Resistance will use the data to dismantle the Syndicate. It won't be easy, but it's a start. As for us—" She trailed off, suddenly uncertain. Jackson felt a flicker of fear. Now that their shared mission was over, would Leora want to go her own way? As if reading his thoughts, Leora stepped closer, placing a hand on his chest. "I was hoping," she said softly, "that you might want to stick around. There's still so much of the galaxy I haven't seen. It would be nice to have a strong, handsome man by my side while I explore." Jackson's heart soared. He pulled Leora close, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him. "I think that can be arranged," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Someone needs to keep you out of trouble, after all." Leora laughed, the sound like music to his ears. "Oh, I think we'll find plenty of trouble together," she said, a mischievous glint in her eye as their lips met in a passionate kiss. Jackson felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The road ahead would be challenging, full of dangers and unknowns, but with Leora by his side, he was ready to face whatever the universe threw at them. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness and pain melting away in the heat of their embrace. When they finally parted, both breathless, Jackson rested his forehead against Leora's. "I love you," he said simply, the words feeling right in a way he'd never experienced before. Leora's eyes widened, a single tear trailing down her cheek. "I love you too," she whispered, "more than I ever thought possible." As the alien suns dipped below the horizon, bathing them in the soft glow of twilight, Jackson and Leora stood entwined, two souls from different worlds who had found home in each other's arms. The future stretched out before them, a vast universe of possibilities. There would be battles to fight, injustices to right, and wonders to discover. But whatever came their way, they would face it together. The grizzled, battle-worn veteran and the brilliant alien fugitive, bound by a love that transcended the stars themselves. And as night fell on their new beginning, Jackson knew with absolute certainty that the greatest adventure of his life was only just beginning.